When Karen from the HOA told me that my son's treehouse was an obstacle and asked me to tear it down, I smiled. Because she had no idea what I was about to do. My name is Ryan Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, a firefighter by trade and a father full-time. I wasn't supposed to raise Eli alone. My wife, Caroline, was the love of my life. She was an astronomer, brilliant, curious, and always fascinated by the stars. The night sky wasn't just her job, it was her soul. When Eli was little, she used to read him bedtime stories about constellations. Told him that every star had a name, a history, and if he ever felt lost, he could always look up and find his way home. We lost her in a car accident last fall. One minute she was on her way to pick up Eli from science camp and the next, I was planning a funeral. She was 36. Just 36. I didn't know how to breathe after that. But Eli needed me. So I did what I had to. I transferred to a quieter firehouse and moved us to a new neighborhood in Georgia where we could start over. Smaller town. Slower pace. Fewer memories around every corner. I thought it would help. But grief follows you. It hangs on your back like a shadow you can't shake. Eli stopped talking for almost 3 weeks. He barely ate. Barely slept. I tried therapy. I tried music. I tried everything except the one thing I didn't realize he needed most, a place where he could still feel her. That's when I built the treehouse. It wasn't fancy at first. Just a few planks, a ladder, and a small platform nestled in the limbs of the oak tree in our backyard. But then Eli asked if we could add a window for stargazing. So I did. Then he brought out one of Caroline's old telescopes. I reinforced the flooring, added shelves for his books, hung little glow-in-the-dark planets from the ceiling. It became his sanctuary. His launchpad to the sky. His connection to Mom. Every night, I'd see the soft light flickering from up there. He'd sit for hours with that telescope, flipping through his mom's astronomy journals, whispering facts to himself like spells. That treehouse didn't just give him comfort, it gave him purpose. Hope. So when a woman I'd never met knocked on my door 2 mornings later, clipboard in hand and sour smile fixed on her face, I had no idea the storm she was about to bring. Her name was Karen Whitmore, president of the Homeowners Association. She didn't introduce herself with a handshake or a welcome. Just one sentence. The treehouse has to go. It's a visual nuisance and a violation of HOA guidelines. I blinked. Thought she was joking. She wasn't. She handed me a formal notice. Said we had 7 days to dismantle it or face daily fines of $500. I asked if she'd even looked at it. Explained what it meant to my son. What it symbolized. Karen didn't care. She adjusted her blouse, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "I'm sorry for your loss. But rules are rules. Maybe your child should learn early that life isn't fair." That was the moment something inside me snapped. This wasn't about property value. It wasn't about HOA rules. It was about control. About someone who saw vulnerability and thought it meant weakness. Who saw grief and mistook it for surrender. But I wasn't going to tear down the one thing holding my son together. No. Karen had just declared war. She just didn't know it yet. And she had no idea who she was messing with. The next morning, just as the sun burned through the early fog, I heard a knock at the front door. It wasn't friendly. Standing there was a woman I'd never seen before. Early 50s, platinum hair pulled tight, lips pursed like she'd been sucking lemons since 1989. She wore a crisp beige blazer and held a clipboard like it was a loaded weapon. "Mr. Mitchell?" I nodded, instinctively bracing myself. "Karen Whitmore. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association." She didn't wait for an invitation. Her eyes flicked past me, scanning the property like she was evaluating a crime scene. "We've had several complaints about an unapproved structure in your backyard." I blinked. "Unapproved structure? You mean the treehouse?" She adjusted her glasses with one sharp finger. Yes. That would be the violation. You're in direct breach of HOA Article 3, Section 14, No elevated external structures shall be built without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Board. I stood there in stunned silence for a second. Then I tried reason. Look, I understand the rules, but this isn't just some playhouse. It's for my son. He's 9. He just lost his mom in a car accident, and that treehouse is the first time I've seen him smile in months. Karen didn't flinch. I'm sorry for your loss, she said with all the warmth of a parking ticket. But emotional circumstances do not override association regulations. You have 7 days to remove the structure or you'll be subject to fines. Fines? For a treehouse? $500 per day, retroactive to the date of notice. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I tried to keep my voice steady. There's no one behind us. The treehouse isn't visible from the street. It's not even close to the property line. Can't you make an exception? That's when she delivered the line that flipped the switch. Maybe your child should learn early that life isn't fair. That was it. For a second I swear I saw red. Not because she quoted policy. Not because of the clipboard or the smug expression or the way she carried herself like a self-appointed dictator of suburban aesthetics. It was because she knew. She knew this wasn't about lawn height or paint colors. She knew it was personal. She made it personal. And she liked it. She turned to leave but paused at the edge of my porch. You seem like a reasonable man, Mr. Mitchell. I'd hate for things to escalate. But rules are rules. Then she walked away, heels clicking against the driveway like gunshots. I stood there frozen, that last sentence echoing in my head. Maybe your child should learn early that life isn't fair. What kind of person says that to a grieving father? What kind of human looks at a 9-year-old boy trying to reconnect with the memory of his mother and sees a code violation? My hands clenched at my sides. My jaw tightened. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about a treehouse anymore. This wasn't about bylaws or permits or architectural review boards. This was a declaration of war. And I may have lost my wife. I may have been hanging on by a thread. But I wasn't about to let a woman with a clipboard and a superiority complex rip down the one thing that was keeping my son grounded. Not without a fight. Karen thought she could scare me into submission. She thought a few threats and a signature would be enough. She thought I'd roll over like the rest of this neighborhood clearly had. But she didn't know me. Not yet. And as she strutted back toward her over-landscaped fortress of judgment, she had no idea the kind of man she'd just poked. I wasn't going to tear down the treehouse. I was going to tear down everything she built. The moment Karen walked off my porch, I knew something was wrong, not just with her, but with this entire setup. There was something about the way she said rules are rules. So polished. So rehearsed. Like she'd said it 1,000 times before and never once been challenged. That's when I realized maybe no one ever had. So I started digging. And the first shovel I grabbed came in the form of my neighbor, Greg Landry, a soft-spoken man in his 60s with a Vietnam vet bumper sticker and a yard that hadn't changed since the Reagan administration. Most people waved at Greg but never stopped to talk. I did. Over coffee on his porch, I asked him straight up. What's the deal with the HOA around here? He chuckled darkly. Karen's the deal, son. Been running it like a monarchy for the past 6 years. Never once held an election. And no one questions it, because the moment you do, she'll find 5 violations on your property by sunrise. That caught my attention. That's not even legal, right? Greg raised an eyebrow. Legal doesn't mean much when everyone's scared. She fines people, bullies them, and keeps all the paperwork under lock and key. I tried to request the financials 3 years ago. She slapped me with a fence height violation and threatened to put a lien on my house. I stared at him. A lien? Over a fence. Suddenly, I saw the neighborhood with new eyes. The unusually uniform yards. The identical mailbox designs. The silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was suppressed. That night, after tucking Eli into bed, I stayed up past midnight reading the HOA bylaws cover to cover. What I found confirmed every suspicion. Karen was supposed to hold annual elections. She was supposed to report financials to members upon request. She was supposed to get homeowner approval before levying new fines. She had violated all of it. And it got better or worse, depending on how you look at it. I found the building permits database online and searched her address. Turns out that beautiful cabana behind her house, the one with the tiled roof, built-in bar, and mounted TV? Not permitted. The system showed a permit application filed 5 years ago and rejected. Yet the structure was built anyway. So let me get this straight. Karen fines people $100 for having the wrong type of mulch. But she's out here building luxury poolside lounges without approval? Game on. The next morning, I drafted a formal complaint and filed it with the county zoning department. Not anonymously. I wanted Karen to know exactly who was coming for her. Then I filed a second request, this one with the HOA board, or what was left of it, demanding access to the financial records. Under HOA law, I was legally entitled to them. She had 5 business days to comply. She didn't. So I added non-compliance with financial transparency to the growing list of her sins. Then, I went low-tech. I printed 73 flyers. Each one detailed Karen's violations. Her unpermitted cabana. The missing elections. The misuse of funds. Her illegal fines. And the exact bylaws she had broken. I quoted everything. Word for word. Black and white. Then, just before dawn, I walked this neighborhood like a ghost. Wearing gloves. Hoodie up. And slipped a flyer into every single mailbox. By 7 a.m., the whole street was buzzing. Greg called me at 8:12 a.m. on the dot. She's on a warpath. Stormed out of her house in slippers, screaming about libel and trespassing. I smiled into my coffee. Let her scream. Let her rage. I hadn't broken a single rule. Not one. But she had broken dozens. And now for the first time everyone knew. Karen wanted to use fear to silence this neighborhood. She didn't expect someone like me to show up. Someone with nothing left to lose and a reason to fight. She tried to take down a treehouse. I was about to take down her entire empire. By the end of the week, the neighborhood wasn't quiet anymore. People stopped walking with their heads down. They looked around. They talked. They asked questions. And they started knocking on my door. The first was Mrs. Clark, a retired schoolteacher who'd lived here for 22 years. She clutched the flyer like it was a lifeline. As she fined me $250 for putting sunflowers in my front yard, she said, eyes misty. Told me they weren't aesthetically consistent with the HOA's floral vision. I ripped them out. I cried the whole night. Then came Mark and Julian, a married couple down the block. She threatened to fine us because our pride flag wasn't seasonal decor. Told us we were disrupting the harmony of the community. They showed me the violation notice. It read like a hate letter dressed in legalese. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Hernandez arrived, holding her daughter's wheelchair ramp permit. Karen said the ramp made the porch look industrial, she whispered. I offered to paint it. She said, or you can move. These weren't just HOA disputes. These were wounds. Karen hadn't been enforcing rules. She had been weaponizing them. Using policy as a scalpel to cut away anyone who didn't fit her picture-perfect fantasy of what this neighborhood should be. Traditional. Controlled. Silenced. But now the silence was breaking. And I wasn't the only one ready to fight. We started calling ourselves the Shadow Committee. It wasn't official, but it was real. We met quietly. At Greg's garage. In backyard sheds. Even inside the treehouse where Eli would listen, wide-eyed but proud. Each neighbor came with a story. Each story came with proof. We compiled violation letters with no basis in the bylaws. Emails from Karen laced with threats and passive aggression. Photos of her illegal cabana, now upgraded with a projector screen and wine fridge. And most damning, the financial audit she refused to submit, despite 3 formal requests from us. It wasn't just abuse of power anymore. It was theft. Karen had been collecting fines, and no one knew where the money had gone. We started a petition for her removal. HOA law said we needed 60% of homeowners to sign. We got 72% in 4 days. Karen must have felt the shift. Because she started circling. She knocked on doors with that same clipboard, but now her smile cracked at the corners. There's been a lot of misinformation going around, she said. Don't believe the rumors. We're just trying to maintain standards. But no one was listening anymore. Not really. Because once you open people's eyes, you can't close them again. Then came the final piece of the plan. We scheduled an open HOA meeting, the first public one in over 6 years. Greg filed the request. I arranged the space at the community hall. Mark built a website with a live stream. Mrs. Clark invited a local reporter from the county paper. Karen had no idea what was coming. On the night before the meeting, I stood in the backyard. Eli was in the treehouse, telescope pointed at the stars. He looked down at me and smiled. Mom would have liked it here, he said. Even with all the Karen stuff. I smiled back, my throat tight. Because this wasn't just about a structure in a tree. It was about safety. Dignity. Community. It was about telling bullies. Not this time. Not anymore. Tomorrow everything would change. Not just for me. But for all of us. The night of the meeting felt electric. People showed up early, dressed like they were going to court. Folding chairs filled the community hall. Greg wore a tie for the first time in 10 years. Mrs. Clark brought note cards. Mark brought a GoPro. And I brought everything. 2 folders. One labeled evidence. The other labeled after. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, on purpose, probably. That was her style. She walked in like she owned the place. Clipboard in hand. Lipstick perfect. And that smug smile, the kind that says, let's get this over with. She tapped the mic and cleared her throat. Good evening. As president of the Homeowners Association, I want to remind everyone that tonight's gathering is a courtesy, not a legal obligation. Let's keep things respectful. Respectful. Coming from a woman who fined a family $400 because their mailbox was 1 shade too blue. But I let her talk. Because her words were digging her own grave. When she finally opened the floor for discussion, I stood up. My voice was calm. Measured. I'm Ryan Mitchell. New resident. Lot 34. Karen fake smiled. Yes, we're familiar with you. Good. Then you'll appreciate what I'm about to share. I opened the evidence folder. And I began. First, the bylaws. HOA Charter, Section 8, annual elections must be held to determine board leadership. According to records, the last election was held, never. Gasps. I looked up. Karen froze, but said nothing. Second, the finances. We requested access to financial statements 3 times. Legally required. Denied every time. We have no record of where the HOA fines, totaling over $42,000 in the past 5 years, have gone. People murmured. I saw heads turning, eyes narrowing. Third, the cabana. I pulled up a photo of Karen's backyard. Printed. Enlarged. The unpermitted construction. Built after permit denial in 2019. County records attached. That structure violates the exact guidelines she fined others for, $500 per day. Silence. Dead silence. Then, I held up the petition. 72% of homeowners have signed this, demanding an immediate vote to remove Karen Whitmore from her position as HOA President, effective tonight. Boom. It echoed like thunder. Karen stood up. Her face red. Voice trembling with rage behind a mask of professionalism. This is a personal attack. A smear campaign. These people are being manipulated. Karen, I interrupted, the only manipulation here is yours. You ruled with fear. With fines. With threats. But that ends tonight. Greg stepped forward. Let's vote. One by one, hands went up. Neighbor after neighbor. Even the Johnsons, who never came to anything, raised theirs. It wasn't close. It wasn't even close. Karen was out. She tried to gather her things with dignity. But her clipboard slipped. Papers spilled. Nobody helped her pick them up. She walked out alone. No title. No power. No control. Just the sound of the community hall doors clicking shut behind her. I walked home that night under a sky full of stars. Eli was waiting in the treehouse, blanket draped over his shoulders, telescope pointed high. Did she go away? He asked. Yeah, buddy, I said, climbing up beside him. She's gone. He smiled, rested his head on my shoulder. And for the first time in months, I felt like we were safe. Like this was home. Not just a house. Not just a yard. But ours. Karen tried to tear down something that gave my son peace. Instead, she watched her empire collapse. Because when enough people say no more, even the loudest clipboard in the room goes silent. The morning after the vote, the air felt different. Lighter. Like someone had opened all the windows in the neighborhood at once. Karen's house sat silent, curtains drawn, porch empty, the clipboard finally gone. 3 days later, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. The community had already said it for her. According to Greg, she listed her house quietly and sold it within the week. Rumor had it she moved to Florida somewhere without a formal HOA. Irony has a beautiful sense of direction. Her cabana? Ordered dismantled by the city. No permits, no exceptions. What she built without permission was torn down legally. Poetic, really. But this story wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about rebuilding. After Karen left, we formed a temporary HOA committee. Not people with power trips or personal agendas, just neighbors. We opened the books. Held elections. Voted on rule revisions. Gone were the archaic fines and color-coded shrub lists. Instead, we added new guidelines. No child structure, like a playset or treehouse, could be removed without a full vote. All financial reports were to be made public quarterly. And most importantly, no member shall use HOA policy to harass, intimidate, or target another resident. We called it Eli's Amendment. Unanimous vote. The treehouse? It stayed. And not only that. The neighborhood helped us paint it. Greg donated weatherproof paint. Julian climbed up and installed a tiny solar-powered light. Mrs. Clark brought over a wind chime that had belonged to her late husband. And Eli? Eli painted one wall himself. A galaxy. Blues. Purples. Stars. Planets. A shooting star streaking across the wood, just like the one Mom used to point out. As she can see it from up there, he whispered. Right, Dad? Yeah, buddy, I said. As she can. Sometimes, what starts as a fight to protect one small thing becomes a movement that transforms everything. Karen tried to tear down our peace. She tried to control a community through fear and silence. But in the end, she was the one who lost everything she built. Her control. Her status. Her precious cabana. Gone. She wanted power. She wanted obedience. But all she taught us was what happens when good people stop being silent. Because here's the truth. When you fight for what's right, you never fight alone. Not really. You think you're standing by yourself. Until one neighbor steps up. Then another. And another. Until suddenly you're not just defending a treehouse. You're defending community, compassion, and common sense. Karen thought we'd be afraid. She thought we'd fold. But instead we rose. Together. Now when I walk through this neighborhood, I don't just see trimmed lawns and matching fences. I see stories. I see courage. I see a treehouse painted like a galaxy. And a little boy who finally smiles again. And that, right there, that's what winning really looks like.